The funeral flowers had barely begun to fade when the calls started. 2 weeks after burying my wife, my own children were already circling. Not with condolences, but with plans. Plans for my house. Plans for my life. They spoke of practicality and what's best for you. But I could hear what they weren't saying and see what they were already counting as theirs. They thought grief would make me weak. They thought they knew my next move. But what they didn't know was that my wife had left me something they could never touch. The lilies from her farewell still clung to the air. Their scent a reminder of what had been taken and what was already being circled. 2 weeks after laying Miriam to rest, the calls began. Not gentle check-ins, not the warm kind of family worry, but a tone I knew too well, wrapped in polite urgency, sharp underneath. "Dad, we need to talk about the house." Gabriel's voice was steady, but it carried that controlled impatience he'd worn since adolescence, the kind that pretends to care while measuring what's next. I let the steam from my untouched coffee curl into the kitchen light before answering. "Good morning to you too, Gabe." They didn't ask if I'd eaten. They didn't ask how I was sleeping. Instead, he pressed on. "The upkeep is too much. The place is too big. There's a buyer already waiting." And though I knew it wasn't about practicality, I let the silence hang long enough for him to feel it. "There's no mortgage," I finally said. Flat. Factual. A truth I had never bothered to share. The pause on the other end wasn't surprise. It was recalculation. I could almost see him at his dining table, laptop open, columns glowing on a spreadsheet. Not numbers about me, numbers about my home, my life, and what they thought they could do with it. From the garden window, I saw the rosemary leaning into the stone path, the old lemon tree needing a trim. Every branch, every stone, a monument to what Miriam and I had built, and to what I wasn't about to surrender. "You're worried about me?" I asked, still watching the garden. "I'm worried about what makes sense," he said. Each word clipped like it had already been practiced. "We could put the money to good use." I could hear his wife's name forming in the background of his breath before I stopped listening. I'd taught him numbers when he was small, making change with the ice cream cart in summer. And now he was calculating me. I set the mug down without drinking, the ceramic landing with the quiet weight of a decision made in secret. My voice was calm when I ended the call, but the silence that followed was different. It wasn't the stillness of grief anymore. It was the space between the first blow and the next. Because Miriam had left me something they couldn't take, and when they found out what it was, it would change everything. The phone rang again before the quiet could settle into the walls. This time it was Alina, her voice pitched just a little too high, the tone she used when she wanted bad news to sound like an opportunity. She didn't waste time on small talk. "Gabriel and I have been talking," she began, "and we both think it's time you sold the house. You could move in here with us. We got the finished basement, a full bath. We could even put in a kitchenette. Your own entrance, your own space. Perfect, right? Perfect. A word far too big for 4 walls underground. And the money?" I asked. "Well, after we fix up the basement, you could set some aside. Help with Mara's tuition. Maybe even help Gabe with his new place. It's all family, Dad. Win-win." I could hear her husband's voice in hers, the rehearsed cadence of 2 people who had already agreed on the ending before they'd let me read the script. I leaned against the doorway, looking at the dust floating in the late morning light. "Alina," I said quietly, "when was the last time you called me about something that wasn't money?" "That's not fair," she shot back. "I've been busy. Mara's in her 3rd year. It's been 2 months. I cut in. 2 months since you called about anything else." Silence stretched, brittle as thin ice. Then she blurted it out. "You've been sending Mara money every month?" "Yes, 500 for 2 years. Another pause. "She doesn't need to know that," she said finally. Of course she didn't. If Mara knew, she might start questioning the stories they'd built about her grandfather. The frail old man who could manage his own affairs, the one who needed decisions made for him. "I need to go," I said, and this time I ended the call first. For a long moment, I just stood there in the hallway. Miriam's reading glasses were still on the console table, folded neatly on top of a book she'd never finish. I reached out, then stopped. Touching them felt like crossing into a place I wasn't ready to enter. Instead, my feet carried me into her study. The room smelled faintly of lemon oil and the soft trace of her perfume. Her desk sat exactly as she'd left it, pen resting across a legal pad, an envelope corner peeking from beneath a stack of papers. I slid into her chair, the leather worn smooth where her arms had rested, and for the first time in weeks, I felt my shoulders ease. The bottom drawer stuck the way it always had. Inside, beneath the clutter of everyday life, my fingers found a pale blue folder. A yellow note on the cover and her careful block letters read, "If you're reading this, you need to know what's inside." I didn't open it right away. I just let my palm rest on it, feeling the weight of something that might change everything. Because whatever was inside, I knew one thing. Miriam had never done anything without a reason. And if she'd kept this from me, then it was meant to be found now. I opened the folder slowly, as if speed might make the truth hit harder. Inside, the first thing that caught my eye was a stack of financial statements. Accounts I had never seen before, not the ones we'd shared for decades, but separate ones in Miriam's name, some with small balances, others holding more than I would have imagined, not fortunes, but enough to make me wonder why they'd been kept apart, tucked away like a secret she wasn't ready to tell. Beneath the papers was something that made my breath still, a deed to a property overseas. A small villa on a coastline I had only ever seen in photographs, purchased years ago, her name alone printed on the title. Alongside it, a letter from a foreign law firm, offering to manage rentals. She had declined in her own hand at the bottom. "Not yet. Keep private." The words itched in my mind. Private, not as a matter of convenience, but intent. There were more documents. Insurance policies, most naming the children, but one was different. A modest policy, dated not long before she fell ill, leaving everything to Mara, bypassing her parents entirely. I sat back in her chair, the scent of lemon polish rising stronger as my pulse steadied. Miriam had been many things, patient, meticulous, deliberate. Nothing in this folder was an accident. Then I found the envelope. Smaller, sealed, with my name in the handwriting I had known since we were barely more than kids. I slid my thumb under the flap and unfolded the letter. "Elias, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and the calls have already started. They won't come because they need you. They'll come because they want what you've built. I've watched it for years, the way they measure what isn't theirs yet. You've always given the benefit of the doubt. I stopped doing that long ago. The house is yours. It stays yours. But if you need to disappear for a while, the villa is for you. The instructions are in the back. Sometimes the only way to win is not to play their game." Her voice was in my head, steady and certain, the way it had been when she wanted me to listen, really listen. I turned to the back pocket of the folder. A typed sheet with names, numbers, and a single key taped to the page. Next to it, a note, "Trust Sarah. She owes me her life." Long story. I let the paper fall to the desk, my hand still resting on it. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel like the one being circled. I felt like the one holding the map. And if they thought they knew the rules of this game, they were about to find out how wrong they were. For the rest of the afternoon, I moved the house as if I were walking through two timelines at once. The one everyone thought they saw, and the one Miriam had quietly built beneath it. Every framed photo, every knick-knack, felt less like decoration and more like evidence in a case I hadn't realized I'd been preparing. In the kitchen, the spice rack caught my eye. She'd always arranged it by height, not alphabet, claiming it looked better that way. Back then, I thought it was just her taste for order. Now, I wondered how many of her small choices had been deliberate in ways I'd never questioned. Little acts of quiet defiance against a world that always wanted to rearrange her. I poured a glass of water and stood by the window, watching the late sunlight turn the garden gold. The lemon tree swayed, its branches shifting shadows across the flagstone path. I remembered our last conversation about the children, before she got sick. I'd said, "They love you." She'd answered, "They love the version of me that says yes." I'd brushed it off as one of her darker moods, but now it played in my head like a warning I'd ignored. That evening, my phone lit up with Gabriel's name again. I let it ring out. Minutes later, a voicemail, "Dad, Just think about what I said. We can make this easy for you. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. Easy, his favorite word, when what he meant was give in. Then a text from Alina. We'll come by Saturday to talk. Bring Mara. It'll be good to see you. That phrasing, bring Mara, as though I were the guest of my own home. I placed the phone face down on the counter and walked back to Miriam's study. The folder was still on the desk. I opened again, this time lingering on the insurance policy, naming Mara alone. It was dated after Miriam's diagnosis. Well after. She had made a choice, and she hadn't done it lightly. On top of the documents was a photograph I hadn't noticed before. Miriam and Mara in the garden, both wearing wide straw hats, hands covered in soil from planting herbs. Miriam's arm was around her, smiling in a way she rarely smiled for the camera, unguarded. On the back, in her looping handwriting, teach her how to keep what matters. I stared at those words for a long time, the ticking of the study clock filling the silence. I thought about calling Mara, telling her everything. But Miriam's letter had been clear. If you need to disappear, not if you need to explain. This wasn't the time to show my cards. Not yet. Saturday morning came with a pale winter sun, the kind of light that made the garden look like it was holding its breath. I'd been awake since before dawn, walking the stone paths of my coat, feeling the crunch of frost under my boots. By 8, I'd trimmed the rosemary, swept the steps, and set the kettle on, not for them, but for myself, my rhythm, my house. At 9:17, I heard the tires on gravel. Through the window, Gabriel's black sedan slid into the driveway, the paint so polished it caught the light like a blade. Alina sat in the passenger seat, phone already in hand, her thumbs moving. In the back, Mara's forehead rested against the glass. I opened the front door before they could knock. Morning, I said evenly. Mara reached me first, wrapping her arms around my waist, the scent of strawberry shampoo tugging me backward into summers that felt further away than they should. Hey, kiddo, I murmured, holding her a second longer than necessary. Gabriel and Alina followed. The cold air they carried and felt sharper than the wind outside. You've been busy, Gabriel remarked, eyes scanning the kitchen like an appraiser. Alina offered a smile that never reached her eyes. We thought it'd be good to see you and talk. I gestured toward the table. Talk, then. They sat together, side by side, a united front. Mara wandered to the living room, flipping through a stack of books, her quiet presence like a thread of warmth running through the house. Gabriel cleared his throat. Let's not drag this out. We've found a buyer. Solid offer. More than the place is worth. It's a chance for you to downsize, stop worrying about taxes, maintenance. I told you there's no mortgage. I interrupted, my tone calm. And the taxes are fine. That's not the point. Alina leaned forward. It's about practicality. You don't need all this space. Practicality for me or for you? I asked. The air shifted. Gabriel's jaw tightened. You think we're doing this for ourselves? I didn't answer. Silence is a tool. If you hold it long enough, people start filling it. And sure enough, he kept going. It would free you up. You could move closer to us, be more comfortable, and it would free up. He caught himself. But I already knew where that sentence was going. What if I'm comfortable here? I said, meeting both their eyes. That's not sustainable, he shot back. I set my cup down slowly, letting the sound of ceramic on would land like a gavel. Do you remember the summer you were 12? The roof leaked over the east bedroom. You and I fixed it together. You learned how to lay shingles. What does that have to do with anything? He asked. Everything. I said, this house isn't just space. It's work, and I'm still capable of doing it. Alina's eyes rolled, barely, but enough. Dad, you're almost 70. You shouldn't have to, and yet, I can. I replied. I didn't mention the villa. I didn't mention Miriam's letter. That was for later. From the living room, Mara appeared with a drawing. She'd sketched my garden, the rosemary, the lemon tree, and in the corner, the little blue house that was Miriam's study. It's perfect, I told her. You remember the curtains? She grinned. Grandma told me to always draw what's true. Gabriel shifted in his seat. Why don't you go play in the den, Mara? She skipped away. When she was gone, I leaned forward. Miriam wanted me here. She made sure I could stay. Paid the house off years ago. Alina blinked. Paid it off. I nodded once, quietly, because she didn't want me hounded about it. Gabriel's mouth pressed in. Why didn't you say anything before? Because I didn't need to, I said. A small truth. Dropped like a stone, just enough to make ripples, but not enough to show the depth of the water. They stayed another half hour, trying in careful, measured ways to steer the conversation back toward logistics, contracts, timelines, simple steps forward. I let their words pass over me like wind through bare branches, nodding when politeness demanded it, deflecting when persistence pressed too hard. Instead, I asked about Mara's art classes, about Alina's new project at work, about Gabriel's latest round of golf. Each answer was shorter than the last, their patience fraying in little threads they thought I couldn't see. When they finally stood to leave, Gabriel's handshake was missing entirely, just a tight nod, his mouth set in that straight line he perfected in boardrooms. Just think about it, Dad. The buyer won't wait forever. I'll think, I said, walking them to the door. Mara hugged me again, softer this time, her voice muffled against my coat. I'll come back soon. Any time, kiddo, I replied and meant it. When their car rolled away, I stayed in the open doorway, letting the cold air wash over me until it bit through the bone. Inside, the silence settled in again, not empty, not mourning, but sharper now, like the pause before a move no one sees coming. I went to Miriam's study. The blue folder lay where I'd left it. Opening it, my eyes went straight to the photograph. Her and Mara in the garden, straw hats, soil on their hands. That note on the back, teach her how to keep what matters. I realized then, the real fight wasn't about the house. It was about making sure the next generation understood the worth of something you don't put a price tag on. And the first lesson would be one they wouldn't even realize they were learning until it was too late. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the back of Miriam's typed sheet. The ring was brief before a woman's voice, warm but certain, answered. This is Sarah. My name is Elias Crane. I said, my tone as even as I could manage. Miriam Crane was my wife. She told me to call you when the time came. There was a pause, the kind that feels measured. Then she spoke with the soft certainty of someone who had already anticipated this conversation. Then, Mr. Crane, I think we should meet. And soon. When we ended the call, her voice stayed with me. Not just her words, but the way she'd said them, like an unopened envelope that you know holds both the answer and question. The rest of the afternoon, I let the house guide me. The photograph of Gabriel's first fishing trip, Alina's lopsided ceramic mug from school, Mara's drawing, still on the table. I saw it all differently now, as though Miriam's letter had shifted the light in every room. In the kitchen, I made another list. 3 columns this time. What they know, what they don't, what I want them to think. The last column was the most important, because this wasn't going to be an explosion. This would be a slow, deliberate temperature change, one they wouldn't notice until the air was no longer theirs to control. The next morning, the air felt heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves had been listening to my thoughts overnight. I drove across town, the sky still a muted gray, streets half awake, carrying that strange hush before the day fully claims them. Sarah's address led me to a weathered 2-story building with ivy curling over its brick face. She was waiting outside, hands in the pockets of a long charcoal coat, her gaze steady like she'd been studying me long before I arrived. Inside, her office was spare. No clutter, no photographs, just a single desk, 2 chairs, and the low hum of an unseen clock. She gestured for me to sit, then leaned forward. Miriam trusted you with something rare, she began, her voice calm but carrying an undercurrent I couldn't name. And if you're here, it means she believed you were ready to carry it, even if it breaks something in the process. She slid a sealed envelope across the desk. This is the truth she didn't want buried. My fingers hovered over it, pulse steady but slow, the way it is when you know once you open something, you can't ever close it again. The seal tore with a quiet rip that somehow felt louder than the hum of the clock behind us. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting sharp and deliberate, every stroke carrying weight, like each letter had been fought for. I read the first line, and my stomach tightened. It wasn't just a confession. It was a ledger of names, dates, and transactions that didn't belong in the hands of anyone with a conscience. Each entry was a thread in a web that stretched far beyond Miriam's life, and into the lives of people I thought I knew. Sarah watched me, her expression unreadable, but I could feel her measuring every flicker of emotion across my face. "You see now," she said softly, "why she trusted you. This isn't about property or money. It's about control. And if the wrong person gets this, the damage won't just be personal, it will be permanent." I looked up from the page, feeling the shift in the air, that quiet before storm you know you can't stop, only brace for. Somewhere deep down, I realized this wasn't a choice anymore. It was a responsibility I hadn't asked for, but couldn't walk away from. I folded the paper slowly, the edges trembling between my fingers, not from fear, but from the weight of what I now carried. Every word on that page was a spark. In the wrong hands, it could set the entire town ablaze. Sarah leaned closer, her voice low, as if the walls themselves might be listening. "If they find out you have it, you won't get a second chance to decide what to do." The room seemed smaller now, the air thicker. My thoughts raced not in neat lines, but in jagged flashes, faces of people who smiled at me in daylight, yet stood in these secrets knee-deep. My pulse was in my ears, and for the first time in years, I felt hunted, not by someone in the shadows, but by the truth itself. I slid the paper back into the envelope, sealing it with a firm press. My hand betrayed no hesitation, but my chest told another story. Somewhere in this mess was a choice that would either free me or destroy everything that had been left to protect. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. The clock had already started ticking. Night had already settled in by the time I stepped outside, the air heavy with the kind of stillness that made even the wind hesitate. The street lamps flickered weakly, casting trembling pools of light on the cracked pavement, and for a moment I thought I saw a figure at the far end, too still to be casual, too patient to be coincidence. My grip on the envelope tightened, as if the thin layer of paper could somehow shield me from what might be coming. I kept walking, my footsteps echoing in the hollow quiet, every shadow suddenly alive with possibility. Somewhere behind me, a faint crunch of gravel, deliberate, measured, crawled under my skin. I didn't turn. I couldn't. The truth I carried wasn't just dangerous, it was wanted. And whoever was following me wasn't going to ask nicely. By the time I reached the old bridge, the air felt colder, sharper. My breath clouded in front of me as I leaned against a railing, looking down at the dark water below. My reflection was just a blur, but in it, I could see the version of myself I'd have to become if I chose to go all the way. One step forward, and there'd be no coming back. Somewhere in the darkness behind me, a voice, low, steady, and far too close, said my name. I froze, my pulse thudding in my ears, the night air suddenly feeling like it was pressing in from all sides. That voice, calm, deliberate, carried a weight that made my spine tighten. I didn't turn right away. Instead, I let the silence stretch, hoping it might reveal more than the words had. When I finally glanced over my shoulder, the figure was only a few steps away, face half hidden in shadow, but the glint in his eyes told me he knew exactly what I was holding. He didn't rush, didn't threaten, just stood there, watching, as if waiting for me to choose whether to fight or to fold. "I think you have something that belongs to me," he said, his tone low enough that the wind could carry it away if I wasn't listening for every syllable. My fingers tightened around the envelope until the paper crumpled. I knew this wasn't a request. Whatever was inside, whatever my late wife had hidden, was worth more than I'd imagined. I took a slow step back, my heel brushing the edge of the bridge. One wrong move, and I'd be in the freezing black water below, or in a situation far worse than drowning. His gaze never left mine, and I could feel the unspoken countdown between us. If I handed it over, I'd be safe tonight, but I'd lose everything tomorrow. If I didn't, well, the look in his eyes made me wonder if I'd even see tomorrow. The night seemed to hold its breath. Even the faint hum of the city in the distance had faded, leaving only the sound of the river beneath us, slow, cold, and merciless. I could feel the weight of the envelope in my hand, like it was pulsing with its own heartbeat, as though it knew its fate was about to be decided. He took a step forward, his boots grinding against the wooden planks, each creak echoing louder than it should. I didn't move. My chest rose and fell in measured breaths, my mind racing through a dozen ways it could end, and most of them weren't good. The air between us thickened, charged with something dangerous, almost electric. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, though his tone carried the kind of calm that made the claim hard to believe. "But if you knew what that really is, you wouldn't dare keep it." His eyes darted to the envelope, then back to me, as if daring me to open it right here and now. For a moment, I considered it. Maybe the truth inside was worse for him than for me. Maybe whatever my wife had left behind wasn't meant for his hands at all. My thumb hovered over the sealed edge, feeling the ridge of glue, knowing that with one quick tear, the power would shift. But power shifts are dangerous, and they have a way of setting fires you can't put out. I could almost see the flames already, not literal, but in the faces, the lives, the reputations that would burn if the secret came to light. I took another step back. His eyes narrowed, and in that fraction of a second, I understood this wasn't just about the envelope. It was about what I was willing to risk to keep what was mine, and whether I had the courage to see it through. His stare didn't waver, and in that stillness, I could feel the silent calculation behind his eyes. He wasn't just weighing the worth of what I held. He was measuring me, my resolve, my fear, my limits. The river breeze caught the edge of my coat, snapping it softly like a warning. I kept my grip on the envelope tight, knuckles whitening, heart pounding slow but hard. He stepped closer, closing the space between us until I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind carved not by laughter, but by years of tension. "You think this is about property," he murmured, voice low enough that the night seemed to lean in to hear. "It's not. It's about control, and right now, you've got more than you can handle." I wanted to speak, to tell him that I wasn't afraid, that I'd stood in worse storms than this. But the truth was, this wasn't like any storm I'd known. This was a quiet, deliberate kind of danger, the kind that didn't shout, didn't rage, but lingered just long enough to unravel you from the inside out. He glanced over his shoulder, as if checking to see if we were still alone, then leaned in slightly. "Once it's opened, there's no going back. People you care about will pay the price. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they will." His words landed heavy, like stones dropped into deep water, each one sinking into the part of me that still wasn't sure I wanted to know the full truth. The envelope felt heavier now, almost alive in my hand, as though it too was waiting for me to decide whether I was its keeper or its executioner. And somewhere in the distance, a sound, faint, muffled, almost like footsteps on gravel, reminded me that we weren't as alone as we thought. The crunch of gravel grew louder, deliberate, unhurried, like whoever was approaching already knew they had the advantage. I didn't move, but my grip on the envelope tightened until the edges bit into my palm. He didn't look back this time. His jaw tensed, a flicker of unease breaking through his mask before it vanished as quickly as it came. Out of the shadows emerged a figure, coat collar turned up against the wind, face half hidden by the brim of a hat. The dim glow from the street lamp caught just enough to reveal the smirk, the kind that didn't belong to a friend. My pulse kicked faster. I didn't recognize him, but the way his eyes swept over me, it was as if he already knew exactly who I was, and exactly what I had. "You've taken your time," the man in front of me said without turning. His tone was too casual, too practiced, and it made the hair at the back of my neck stand on end. The newcomer didn't answer, just closed the distance with measured steps, the air between us heavy with something unspoken, an understanding that whatever was about to happen couldn't be undone. My mind raced. I could run. I could hide the envelope. I could bluff my way out. But the way they both looked at me, one calculating, the other quietly predatory, told me none of those options would work. This wasn't a moment to escape. It was a moment to decide, and the decision would change everything. The newcomer finally spoke, voice low and gravelly. "If you open that, you'll wish you hadn't. If you don't, you'll still wish you had." His words twisted in my chest, an impossible choice disguised as a warning. And then, just beyond them, a flicker of movement in the darkness. Someone else was watching. The shadow moved again, not with the clumsy hesitation of someone hiding, but with the deliberate control of a predator circling prey. My breath caught as a faint glint of metal flashed in the dark, then disappeared just as quickly. The two men in front of me hadn't noticed, or maybe they had, and were pretending not to. The brimmed-hat stranger stopped only a few feet away, his boots sinking slightly into the wet gravel, each crunch sounding like the ticking of a clock running out. The man I'd been facing shifted his stance, shoulders tight now, voice lower. "We don't have all night." But I could hear it, a faint tremor buried beneath his words, like he was starting to realize this meeting wasn't entirely under his control anymore. I kept my eyes on the darkness behind them, every instinct screaming that the real danger was in front of me. It was just out of sight. My hand slid the envelope halfway into my coat pocket, not to hide it, but to grip it tighter, to make sure no one could snatch it without taking me down first. The air was colder now, sharp against my skin, but the heat in my chest was rising. I'd been cornered before. I'd been outnumbered before. But never like this. Never with the sense that everyone here had a different version of the truth, and that whichever one prevailed tonight would decide who walked away. From the darkness, a voice, female, calm, and almost too soft to hear, cut through the tension. "You're all making a mistake." Both men turned their heads, just slightly, just enough for me to see their eyes change. The woman stepped into the dim spill of light, her face shadowed just enough to hide the fine details. But her eyes, they cut through the night like a blade. Neither man spoke, not yet. They were gauging her, the way predators pause when something unexpected wanders into their hunting ground. She moved slowly, each step deliberate, as if she knew the ground was mine with more than just tension. Her voice stayed low, steady, but there was an undercurrent to it, the kind that carried weight even without volume. "If you go through with this, none of you will walk away the same, and one of you won't walk away at all." My pulse thudded in my ears, loud enough to drown out the hum of the street lamp overhead. The stranger in the brimmed hat shifted his weight again, a subtle tell that something in her words had struck too close. The man in front of me took a step back, not much, but enough for me to feel the shift in power. I glanced between them, realizing the balance had changed, and maybe, just maybe, this woman wasn't here to save anyone but to decide who fell first. Her gaze slid to me, holding for just a beat too long, before returning to the two men. "He doesn't know everything," she said softly, almost as if she was talking to herself. "But he knows enough to ruin you both." That was when I realized she wasn't a bystander. She was the one pulling the strings. The man in the brimmed hat finally spoke, his voice low but taut, like a wire stretched to the breaking point. "You've said enough," he muttered, but the tremor in his tone betrayed him. The other man, the one who had been blocking my way, was no longer looking at me at all. His focus had shifted entirely to her, as if she'd suddenly become the only real threat in the alley. She didn't flinch. Instead, she took one slow step forward, closing the space between them by a dangerous inch. "Enough?" she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow sharper than any shout. "You think I walked all this way in the dark to give you the luxury of deciding what's enough?" A gust of wind carried the faint rattle of an old sign swinging somewhere behind us, the only sound filling the silence that followed. My instinct screamed at me to step back, to create space, but my legs wouldn't move. Her presence was magnetic. Terrifying, yes, but in the way a storm holds you at the window when you should be running for shelter. The man with the hat glanced toward the mouth of the alley, just for a heartbeat, but I caught it, and so did she. A slow, knowing smile crept across her face, though there was no warmth in it. "You can run," she said, tilting her head slightly, "but the truth will follow you, and it runs faster than you ever will." That's when I realized whatever was about to happen here wouldn't end with all three of us walking away. And worse, I wasn't sure which side I'd survive standing on. The man with the hat finally broke eye contact, his gaze darting to the narrow gap at the far end of the alley, the only exit that didn't lead past her. His shoulders stiffened, as if bracing for something unseen. She noticed, of course. She noticed everything. "You're already cornered," she said softly, her words curling to the cold air like smoke. "The only choice you have left is whether you leave with your lies or without them." The second man shifted uneasily, his hands twitching near his coat pockets, and I felt the tension coil tighter. It wasn't just fear in his eyes now, it was calculation. He was measuring the distance, the angles, the risk. I could almost hear his thoughts ticking like a clock, counting down to something dangerous. Then she took another step, closing the gap until the stale warmth of their breath mingled in the cold night. "Go ahead," she murmured, almost daring him. "Make your move. But understand this, the truth has already chosen its side." I swallowed hard, my pulse thundering in my ears. It was no longer about who would win this standoff. It was about what would be lost in the process. And I had the sinking feeling that when the dust settled, none of us would leave with the same lives we had walked in with. Her words lingered in the air, heavy as wet rope, and I could feel the entire scene tightening around us. The street lamps hummed faintly, casting halos of weak light that did nothing to soften the edges of what was about to unfold. The man in the hat adjusted his stance. Not quite retreat, not quite advance, and in that hesitation I saw it. The moment he realized he might not walk away without leaving something vital behind. The second man's eyes kept flicking to the exit, but his body betrayed him. His jaw clenched, his breath shortened, and his shoulders leaned in predator's posture. It wasn't escape he was considering anymore, it was confrontation. My chest tightened as I realized I was standing too close to the line where words would no longer matter. Then she did something unexpected. She smiled, not the kind that warms a room, but the kind that sharpens the air, as if she had been waiting for this exact turn. "Funny," she whispered, leaning closer, "how people fight hardest when they already know they've lost." The space between them dissolved, and I could almost hear the beat of each heart, syncopated, uneven, colliding in an invisible war. One wrong twitch, one breath too loud, and it would all shatter. My throat felt dry, my fingers numb, and yet my senses were ablaze, because somewhere deep inside, I knew the next sound I'd hear might be the one I'd never forget. The silence broke like a pane of glass, not with words, but with the scrape of a boot against the concrete. His hand shot forward, gripping her wrist, and in that instant the street seemed to collapse inward, swallowing all sound except the ragged breaths between them. Her other hand, calm but deliberate, slid into her coat pocket, and I realized too late that she had been holding her ground for this exact moment. The man in the hat stepped in, a shadow cutting between two fires, but his voice was gone. His presence was a warning, yet neither of them seemed willing to heed it. Her eyes didn't flinch. She leaned forward, speaking low enough that I couldn't catch every word, but the ones I did hear were like teeth tearing through cloth. Undeniable, irreversible. His grip loosened, not from mercy, but from the shock of what she had just confessed. The second man's face drained, the bravado melting into something raw and dangerous. He stepped back, only to surge forward again, and this time there was no hesitation. Her arm came free. Her coat flared open, and I caught the glint, small, unassuming, but sharp enough to change everything. It all happened in the span of a heartbeat, a shove, a gasp, the hollow thud of something hitting the ground. Then stillness. The kind of stillness that isn't peace, but the stunned aftermath of a storm no one saw coming. She stood over him, chest heaving, eyes blazing with a truth that could burn the whole street down. And as she turned toward me, her voice steady but laced with something that would haunt me forever, she said, "Now you understand why I could never let him walk away." Her words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that refused to die, curling around everything, seeping into the cracks. I could still hear the faint clatter of the object she had dropped, rolling once, twice, before coming to rest just beyond his still hand. The street was empty now, yet I could feel the weight of unseen eyes pressing against us from the shadows. The kind of silence that doesn't offer comfort but promises consequences. She straightened her coat, movements deliberate, as if each gesture was erasing the vulnerability she'd allowed herself moments ago. I wanted to ask her what came next, but the look she gave me said the answer wasn't mine to know. Not yet. The man on the ground groaned faintly, and with that sound came the realization that nothing was over, only paused. Footsteps echoed from the far end of the alley, slow and deliberate, each one sharper than the last. She didn't turn toward them. She didn't have to. Her shoulders tightened just enough to betray that she knew exactly who was coming. I felt the urge to move, to step between her and whatever was about to arrive. But something in me froze because I wasn't entirely sure which side of the story I was standing on anymore. When the figure emerged from the darkness, their eyes went immediately to the man on the ground, then to her, and then to me. The moment stretched, taut as a rope about to snap, and I realized that whatever choice she made next would not just decide her fate, but mine. The figure stepped closer, and in that dim slice of light, I saw the truth in their eyes. Not rage, not fear, but the kind of weary understanding that only comes from having carried a burden for far too long. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. The scene before them told a story no words could smooth over. She didn't flinch, didn't step back. Instead, she drew in a slow breath, as if she were finally ready to exhale years of secrets in one final release. "It's over," she said, but the way her voice cracked told me it wasn't declaration. It was a plea. The man on the ground stirred again, and for a brief moment his eyes locked with mine. There was something unspoken there, something that would haunt me longer than the memory of this night. The stranger knelt, checking the man's pulse, their movements calm, precise. Then they stood, looking at her one last time before turning away. No threats, no accusations, just a quiet decision to let the weight of what had happened settle exactly where it belonged. As the three of us stood in that fractured stillness, I realized that the truth had not been destroyed tonight. It had been set free. And sometimes, freedom doesn't come with applause or vindication. It comes with the sound of footsteps fading into the dark, the taste of cold air in your lungs, and the knowledge that nothing will ever be the same again. I watched her walk away without looking back, her shadow stretching longer than her figure until it disappeared completely. And in that silence, I understood some endings don't ask for closure. They simply leave you holding the weight of everything unsaid.